In your talk, you talked a lot about the prosperity gap, Canada's prosperity gap with the U.S. and how it grew in the early 90s, and how it relates to the importance of productivity and Canada's productivity. What's the difference, but also that there's a general misunderstanding in terms of what productivity is and what's being measured. What's the difference between the productivity you're talking about as it applies to this prosperity gap and the productivity that how many Canadians interpret that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Productivity is a word that is more scary than anything else to Canadians. And there is a reason for it, which is there are sort of two ways that an organization can get higher productivity. So productivity is how much value added you produce with an hour of your labor. So how much can we sell what you've produced in that hour out into customers in the marketplace? So you can think of it as, if I want to improve productivity, the easiest thing often to think about is how can I get fewer labor hours to produce the thing in question? Can I mechanize more to make sure it takes fewer labor hours to assemble a car, and then I'll sell that car for $20,000, and I'll use 20% fewer labor hours, and it'll be higher productivity. That's the kind of productivity people are worried and nervous about. They say that productivity will cost jobs. I don't think it necessarily will, because if the company figures out how to produce cars more effectively, hopefully they'll sell more of them and there'll be more jobs because there'll be more cars to produce. But I think what's really key in the modern economy is not so much working on, if you will, the denominator, getting fewer labor hours for the thing in question, but it's to make that thing more exciting, delightful to users, so that you can charge a higher price for it. So if you take 5 labor hours to make a smartphone and sell it for $250, the biggest productivity gain you can have is to make it a really cool smartphone that they really love and sell the same 5-hour manufactured smartphone for $500. You've actually doubled your productivity. That's where I think, if you look at Canada versus the US, that's where the difference is. They're investing more in growing the numerator, right? Growing the value of the products they're producing, less so than they're working on grinding down the labor hours. We're not doing enough of that. And that's why I think our productivity is lagging. I really don't believe that industry after industry, you can say for producing the same thing, we take consistently more labor hours. I think what you'd say is we use the same labor hours to produce stuff of lower value added than lots of American companies.
Another concept you talked about was invention versus innovation, and how Canada's been investing heavily over the last few decades or so in more in the former than the latter. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two and why Canada has to change that pattern?
Sure, I'm glad you asked it, because I think it's a really important thing about Canada right now. The distinction is invention is in some sense driven from the inventor on out. So invention is commonly seen as a scientist at a bench dreaming up interesting ideas and creating something that's new to the world. And its value, especially in scientific communities and university communities, is based on how unique it is. You know, wow, this is different than anything that's been made before or thought of before. And there's a big move on to say, gee, we should commercialize more of this stuff. And you know, I've been involved in lots of the discussions and seeing lots of these things. And one of the great problems is lots and lots of that is not commercializable. Why? It's because the inventor thought it was cool, not somebody who would buy it. That's the difference with innovation. Innovation starts from the user and moves on back. It says, hey, there's a physician in the operating theater. Boy, he has or she has problems with this kind of procedure. If we could create an implement that would help, a little medical device that would help that person right there at that time, I bet his hospital would say that's worth investing in. That's really user-driven. You've observed a user, not you. You don't care about it as the inventor. You know that the surgeon does. Or if you care about, I don't know, your home security system, you'd like to have a home security system that you can access more remotely, and that would make you a lot happier. It's driven from the user, and you come back and say, well, what could we do? Is it a piece of hardware that he would need? Is it a piece of software? Is it procedural? What's needed? And so my inventive activities are driven entirely back from what you need. And guess what? When you create something of that sort, the users love it. Why? Because it had them totally in mind, not the inventor totally in mind. I feel in Canada, we keep on putting more and more resources into invention and wonder why it can't be commercialized. And we put almost no resources into innovation, training people to do user-centered innovation. And there's a process, right? There's a process for doing it. And we could be investing in it. As a country, we are not.
Is there it's a hot topic right now, is the commercialization of particularly academic research and what's going on in the universities. There's lots of interesting things going on, but the question is can you commercialize it? Is there something that can fix that disconnect between, say, the business community or the community that's more tied more closely to the market and the consumer, with the academic side of things, where the brains that are inventing these things? Is there a middle ground there that's missing? And is that where the investments you're talking about is not going?
Yes. So I would argue that our commercialization track record on university research is terrific, right? Okay. If you start from the premise, somebody in a university in a lab, without talking to consumers or users or anything, is going to come up with something. Our track record of commercializing that is probably pretty good. I suspect 1 in 100 such things gets commercialized, and I'd say that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Now, the transformational thing that could happen is if you actually had those incredibly bright research scientists needing, as part of the process, to actually go out and understand what the users really care about, need, want, are missing before they start inventing. And then I think our commercialization results would shoot through the roof. But it would be they would be working on completely different things, I think, than they often work on. And of course, some do. I mean, I know some university researchers, who spend all of their time out, with doctors if they're doing medical devices, or with consumers if they're doing advanced materials and the like. So there are some, but it's precious few. And part of it is it's not rewarded, right? It's not part of the job. For some, it's considered crass and commercial. So and for some, it's just a scary thought. They have no idea how to do that. And that's why I think training can be a big part of this. This is why I think one of the things we ought to do is be the first nation on the planet that makes innovation education mandatory in K through 12 education. That you cannot graduate from high school without knowing math, without knowing English and French, and without knowing innovation.
So you have that foundation going into the whole academic arena. Yeah,
or whatever arena you end up going into. Like, I think if you end up being a lawyer, right? If you start thinking about, gee, I have to think about what my clients, what would make their life easier? Are my bills undecipherable? Is the way I cause them to wait in my waiting room and queue in my waiting room bad? They'd be thinking about, how can I innovate their user experience more. Or if you're a nurse, you'd be thinking about the methodology for understanding your users' needs and doing the little things, creating prototypes, creating tests to try things out with them and improve your product. Everybody in the economy would be saying, how can we make this better? And guess what? We'd have lots more globally competitive companies because they know how to meet user needs in unique, new ways that nobody else is doing.